Dreth entered, turned up the light, and, taking a box of cigars from the table, he carried it out. "Here, you fellows, go outside and smoke," he said. "Nell, come on in now. Let's get it over." He returned, sat down, and lighted a cigar for himself. He put his booted feet on the table. Dwayne saw that the room was comfortably, even luxuriously furnished. There must have been a good trail, he thought, else how could all that stuff have been packed in there? Most assuredly it could not have come over the trail he had traveled. Presently he heard the men go outside, and their voices became indistinct. Then Nell came in and seated himself without any of his chief's ease. He seemed preoccupied and, as always, cold. "What's wrong, Nell? Why didn't you get here sooner?" queried Longstreth. "Poggin, damn him. We're on the outs again." "What for?" "Or, he needn't have got sore. He's breaking a new hose over at Faraway, and you know him where a hose's concerned. That kept him, I reckon, more than anything." "What else? Get it out of your system so we can go on to the new job." "Well, it begins back a ways. I don't know how long ago, weeks, a stranger rode into Ord and got down easy like as if he owned the place. He seemed familiar to me, but I wasn't sure. We looked him over, and I left, trying to place him in my mind." "What'd he look like?" "Rangy, powerful man, white hair over his temples, still, hard face, eyes like knives. The way he packed his guns, the way he walked and stood and swung his right hand showed me what he was. You can't fool me on the gun sharp. And he had a grand horse, a big black." "I've met your man," said Longstreth. "No," exclaimed Nell. It was wonderful to hear surprise expressed by this man that did not in the least show it in his strange physiognomy. Nell laughed a short, grim, hollow laugh. "Boss, this here big gent drifts into Ord again and makes up to Jim Fletcher. Jim, you know, is easy laid. He likes men. And when a posse come along trailin' a blind lead, huntin' the wrong way for the man who held up number 6, why, Jim, he up and takes this stranger to be the fly road agent and cottons to him. Got money out of him sure. And that's what stumps me more. What's this man's game? I happen to know, boss, that he couldn't have held up number 6. "How do you know?" demanded Longstreth. "Because I did the job myself." A dark and stormy passion clouded the chief's face. "Damn you, Nell. You're incorrigible. You're unreliable. Another break like that queers you with me. Did you tell Poggin?" "Yes. That's one reason we fell out." He raved. "I thought he was going to kill me. Why did you tackle such a risky job without help or plan? It offered, that's all. And it was easy. But it was a mistake. I got the country and the railroad hollerin' for nothing. I just couldn't help it. You know what idleness means to one of us. You know also that this very life breeds fatality. It's wrong, that's why. I was born of good parents, and I know what's right. We're wrong, and we can't beat the end, that's all. And for my part I don't care a damn when that comes. Fine wise talk from you, Nell said Longstreth, scornfully. Go on with your story. As I said, Jim cottons to the Pretender, and they get chummy. They're together all the time. You can gamble Jim told all he knew and then some. A little liquor loosens his tongue. Several of the boys rode over from Ord, and one of them went to Poggin and says Jim Fletcher has a new man for the gang. Poggin, you know, is always ready for any new man. He says if one doesn't turn out good he can be shut off easy. He rather liked the way this new part of Jim's was boosted. Jim and Poggin always hit it up together. So until I got on the deal Jim's pard was already in the gang, without Poggin or you ever seeing him. Then I got to figuring hard. Just where had I ever seen that chap? As it turned out, I never had seen him, which accounts for my being doubtful. I'd never forget any man I'd seen. I dug up a lot of old papers from my kit and went over them. Letters, pictures, clippings, and all that. I guess I had a pretty good notion what I was looking for and who I wanted to make sure of. At last I found it. And I knew my man. But I didn't spring it on Poggin. Oh no. I want to have some fun with him when the time comes. He'll be wilder than a trapped wolf. I sent Blossom over to Ord to get word from Jim, and when he verified all this talk I sent Blossom again with a message calculated to make Jim hump. Poggin got sore, said he'd wait for Jim, and I could come over here to see you about the new job. He'd meet me in ORD. Nell had spoken hurriedly and low, now and then with passion. His pale eyes glinted like fire in ice, and now his voice fell to a whisper. Who do you think Fletcher's new man is? Who? Demanded Longstreth. Buck Twain. Down came Longstreth's boots with a crash, then his body grew rigid. That Nooses outlaw. That two-shot ace of spades gun thrower who killed Bland, Alloway, and Hardin. Nell whispered this last name with more feeling than the apparent circumstance demanded. Yes, and Hardin, the best one of the Rimrock fellows, Buck Twain. Longstreth was so ghastly white now that his black mustache seemed outlined against chalk. He eyed his grim lieutenant. They understood each other without more words. It was enough that Buck Twain was there in the Big Bend. Longstreth rose presently and reached for a flask, from which he drank, then offered it to Nell. He waved it aside. Nell began the chief, slowly, as he wiped his lips. I gathered you have some grudge against this Buck Twain. Yes. Well, don't be a fool now and do what Poggin or almost any of you men would, don't meet this Buck Twain. I've reason to believe he's a Texas Ranger now. The hell you say, exclaimed Nell. Yes. Go to Ord and give Jim Fletcher a hunch. He'll get Poggin, and they'll fix even Buck Twain. All right. I'll do my best. But if I run into Twain, don't run into him. Longstreth's voice fairly rang with the force of its passion and command. He wiped his face, drank again from the flask, sat down, resumed his smoking, and, drawing a paper from his vest pocket, he began to study it. "Well, I'm glad that's settled," he said, evidently referring to the Twain matter. "Now for the new job. This is October the 18th. On or before the 25th there will be a shipment of gold reach the rancher's bank of Val Verde. After you return to Ord, give Poggin these orders. Keep the gang quiet. You, Poggin, Kane, Fletcher, Panhandle Smith, and Bold to be in on the secret and the job. Nobody else. You'll leave Ord on the 23rd, ride across country by the trail till you get within sight of Mercer. It's 100 miles from Bradford to Val Verde, about the same from Ord time your travel to get you near Val Verde on the morning of the 26th. You won't have to more than trot your horses. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, sharp, ride into town and up to the rancher's bank. Val Verde's a pretty big town. Never been any hold-ups there. Town feels safe. Make it a clean, fast, daylight job. That's all. Have you got the details?" Nell did not even ask for the dates again. "Suppose Poggin or me might be detained?" he asked. Longstreth bent a dark glance upon his lieutenant. "You never can tell what'll come off," continued Nell. "I'll do my best. The minute you see Poggin, tell him. A job on hand steadies him. And I say again, look to it that nothing happens. Either you or Poggin carry the job through. But I want both of you in it. Break for the hills, and when you get up in the rocks where you can hide your tracks, head for Mount Ord. When all's quiet again I'll join you here. That's all. Call in the boys." Like a swift shadow and as noiseless, Twain stole across the level toward the dark wall of rock. Every nerve was a strung wire. For a little while his mind was cluttered and clogged with whirling thoughts, from which, like a flashing scroll, unrolled the long, baffling order of action. The game was now in his hands. He must cross Mount Ord at night. The feat was improbable, but it might be done. He must ride into Bradford, 40 miles from the foothills, before 8 o'clock next morning. He must telegraph McNally to be in Val Verde on the 25th. He must ride back to Ord, to intercept Nell, face him, be denounced, kill him, and while the iron was hot, strike hard to win Poggin's half-won interest as he had wholly won Fletcher's. Failing that last, he must let the outlaws alone to bide their time in Ord, to be free to ride on to their new job in Val Verde. In the meantime he must plan to arrest Longstreth. It was a magnificent outline, incredible, alluring, unfathomable in its nameless certainty. He felt like fate. He seemed to be the iron consequences falling upon these doomed outlaws. Under the wall the shadows were black, only the tips of trees and crags showing, yet he went straight to the trail. It was merely a grayness between borders of black. He climbed and never stopped. It did not seem steep. His feet might have had eyes. He surmounted the wall, and, looking down into the ebony gulf pierced by one point of light, he lifted a menacing arm and shook it. Then he strode on and did not falter till he reached the huge shelving cliffs. Here he lost the trail, there was none, but he remembered the shapes, the points, the notches of rock above. Before he reached the ruins of splintered ramparts and jumbles of broken walls, the moon topped the eastern slope of the mountain, and the mystifying blackness he had dreaded changed to magic silver light. It seemed as light as day, only soft, mellow, and the air held a transparent sheen. He ran up the barrages and down the smooth slopes, and, like a goat, jumped from rock to rock. In this light he knew his way and lost no time looking for a trail. He crossed the divide and then had all downhill before him. Swiftly he descended, almost always sure of his memory of the landmarks. He did not remember having studied them in the ascent, yet here they were, even in changed light, familiar to his sight. What he had once seen was pictured on his mind. And, true as a deer striking for home, he reached the canyon where he had left his horse. Bullet was quickly and easily found. Dwayne threw on the saddle and pack, cinched them tight, and resumed his descent. The worst was now to come. Bare downward steps in rock, sliding, weathered slopes, narrow black gullies, 1,000 openings in a maze of broken stone. These Dwayne had to descend in fast time, leading a giant of a horse. Bullet cracked the loose fragments, sent them rolling, slid on the scaly slopes, plunged down the steps, followed like a faithful dog at Dwayne's heels. Hours passed as moments. Dwayne was equal to his great opportunity. But he could not quell that self in him which reached back over the lapse of lonely, searing years and found the boy in him. He who had been worse than dead was now grasping at the skirts of life, which meant victory, honor, happiness. Dwayne knew he was not just right in part of his mind. Small wonder that he was not insane, he thought. He tramped on downward, his marvelous faculty for covering rough ground and holding to the true course never before even in flight so keen and acute. Yet all the time a spirit was keeping step with him. Thought of Ray Longstreth as he had left her made him weak. But now, with the game clear to its end, with the trap to spring, with success strangely haunting him, Dwayne could not dispel memory of her. He saw her white face, with its sweet sad lips and the dark eyes so tender and tragic. And time and distance and risk and toil were nothing. The moon sloped to the west. Shadows of trees and crags now crossed to the other side of him. The stars dimmed. Then he was out of the rocks, with the dim trail pale at his feet. Mounting Bullet, he made short work of the long slope and the foothills and the rolling land leading down to Ord. The little outlaw camp, with its shacks and cabins and row of houses, lay silent and dark under the paling moon. Dwayne passed by on the lower trail, headed into the road, and put Bullet to a gallop. He watched the dying moon, the waning stars, and the east. He had time to spare, so he saved the horse. Nell would be leaving the rendezvous about the time Dwayne turned back toward ORD. Between noon and sunset they would meet. The night wore on. The moon sank behind low mountains in the west. The stars brightened for a while, then faded. Grey gloom enveloped the world, thickened, lay like smoke over the road. Then shade by shade it lightened, until through the transparent obscurity shone a dim light. Dwayne reached Bradford before dawn. He dismounted some distance from the tracks, tied his horse, and then crossed over to the station. He heard the clicking of the telegraph instrument, and it thrilled him. An operator sat inside reading. When Dwayne tapped on the window he looked up with startled glance, then went swiftly to unlock the door. "Hello. Give me paper and pencil," quick whispered Dwayne. With trembling hands the operator complied. Dwayne wrote out the message he had carefully composed. "Send this, repeat it to make sure, then keep mum. I'll see you again. Goodbye." The operator stared, but did not speak a word. Dwayne left as stealthily and swiftly as he had come. He walked his horse a couple miles back on the road and then rested him till break of day. The east began to redden. Dwayne turned grimly in the direction of ORD. When Dwayne swung into the wide, grassy square on the outskirts of ORD he saw a bunch of saddled horses hitched in front of the tavern. He knew what that meant. Luck still favored him. If it would only hold. But he could ask no more. The rest was a matter of how greatly he could make his power felt. An open conflict against odds lay in the balance. That would be fatal to him, and to avoid it he had to trust to his name and a presence he must make terrible. He knew outlaws. He knew what qualities held them. He knew what to exaggerate. There was not an outlaw in sight. The dusty horses had covered distance that morning. As Dwayne dismounted he heard loud, angry voices inside the tavern. He removed coat and vest, hung them over the pommel. He packed 2 guns, one belted high on the left hip, the other swinging low on the right side. He neither looked nor listened, but boldly pushed the door and stepped inside. The big room was full of men, and every face pivoted toward him. Nell's pale face flashed into Dwayne's swift sight, then Bolt's, then Blossom Kane's, then Panhandle Smith's, then Fletcher's, then others that were familiar, and last that of Poggin. Though Dwayne had never seen Poggin or heard him described, he knew him. For he saw a face that was a record of great and evil deeds. There was absolute silence. The outlaws were lined back of a long table upon which were papers, stacks of silver coin, a bundle of bills, and a huge gold-mounted gun. "Are you gents looking for me?" asked Dwayne. He gave his voice all the ringing force and power of which he was capable. And he stepped back, free of anything, with the outlaws all before him. Nell stood quivering, but his face might have been a mask. The other outlaws looked from him to Dwayne. Jim Fletcher flung up his hands. "My good Dodge, what'd you bust in here for?" he said, plaintively, and slowly stepped forward. His action was that of a man true to himself. He meant he had been sponsor for Dwayne and now he would stand by him. "Back, Fletcher," called Dwayne, and his voice made the outlaw jump. "Hold on, Dodge, and you all," everybody said Fletcher. "Let me talk, seeing I'm in wrong here." His persuasions did not ease the strain. "Go ahead. Talk," said Poggin. Fletcher turned to Dwayne. "Pard, I'm taking it on myself that you meet enemies here when I swore you'd meet friends. It's my fault. I'll stand by you if you let me." "No," Jim replied Dwayne. "But what'd you come for without the signal?" burst out Fletcher, in distress. He saw nothing but catastrophe in this meeting. "Jim, I ain't pressin' my company none. But when I'm wanted bad," Fletcher stopped him with a raised hand. Then he turned to Poggin with a rude dignity. "Poggy, he's my pard, and he's riled. I never told him a word that'd make him sore. I only said Nell hadn't no more use for him than for me. Now, what you say goes in this gang. I never failed you in my life. Here's my pard. I vouch for him. Will you stand for me? There's going to be hell if you don't. And us with a big job on hand." While Fletcher toiled over his slow, earnest persuasion, Dwayne had his gaze riveted upon Poggin. There was something leonine about Poggin. He was tawny. He blazed. He seemed beautiful as fire was beautiful. But looked at closer, with glance seeing the physical man, instead of that thing which shone from him, he was of perfect build, with muscles that swelled and rippled, bulging his clothes, with the magnificent head and face of the cruel, fierce, tawny-eyed jaguar. Looking at this strange Poggin, instinctively divining his abnormal and hideous power, Dwayne had for the first time in his life the inward quaking fear of a man. It was like a cold-tongued bell ringing within him and numbing his heart. The old instinctive firing of blood followed, but did not drive away that fear. He knew. He felt something here deeper than thought could go. And he hated Poggin. That individual had been considering Fletcher's appeal. "Jim, I ante up," he said, "and if Phil doesn't raise us out with a big hand, why, he'll get called, and your pard can set in the game." Every eye shifted to Nell. He was dead white. He laughed, and anyone hearing that laugh would have realized his intense anger equally with an assurance which made him master of the situation. "Poggin, you're a gambler, you are, the ace-high, straight flush hand of the Big Bend," he said, with stinging scorn. "I'll bet you my roll to a greaser peso that I can deal you a hand you'll be afraid to play." "Phil, you're talking wild," growled Poggin, with both advice and menace in his tone. If there's anything you hate, it's a man who pretends to be somebody else when he's not. That so? Poggin nodded in slow gathering wrath. Well, Jim's new pard, this man Dodge, he's not who he seems. Oh ho. He's a hell of a lot different. But I know him. And when I spring his name on you, Poggin, you'll freeze to your gizzard. Do you get me? You'll freeze, and your hand'll be stiff when it ought to be lightnin', all because you'll realize you've been standing there 5 minutes alive before him. If not hate, then assuredly great passion toward Poggin manifested itself in Nell's scornful, fiery address, in the shaking hand he thrust before Poggin's face. In the ensuing silent pause Nell's panting could be plainly heard. The other men were pale, watchful, cautiously edging either way to the wall, leaving the principals and Dwayne in the center of the room. Spring his name, then, you, said Poggin, violently, with a curse. Strangely Nell did not even look at the man he was about to denounce. He leaned toward Poggin, his hands, his body, his long head all somewhat expressive of what his face disguised. Buck Dwayne, he yelled, suddenly. The name did not make any great difference in Poggin. But Nell's passionate, swift utterance carried the suggestion that the name ought to bring Poggin to quick action. It was possible, too, that Nell's manner, the import of his denunciation, the meaning back of all his passion held Poggin bound more than the surprise. For the outlaw certainly was surprised, perhaps staggered at the idea that he, Poggin, had been about to stand sponsor with Fletcher for a famous outlaw hated and feared by all outlaws. Nell waited a long moment, and then his face broke its cold immobility in an extraordinary expression of devilish glee. He had hounded the great Poggin into something that gave him vicious, monstrous joy. Buck Dwayne. Yes, he broke out, hotly. The Noose's gunman. That two-shot, ace of spades lone wolf. You and I, we've heard 1,000 times of him, talked about him often. And here he in front of you. Poggin, you were back in Fletcher's new pard, Buck Dwayne. And he'd fooled you both but for me. But I know him. And I know why he drifted in here. To flash a gun on Schaldine, on you, on me. Bah! Don't tell me he wanted to join the gang. You know a gunman, for you're one yourself. Don't you always want to kill another man? And don't you always want to meet a real man, not a four-flush? It's the madness of the gunman, and I know it. Well, Dwayne faced you, called you. And when I sprung his name, what ought you have done? What would the boss, anybody, have expected of Poggin? Did you throw your gun, swift, like you have so often? Nor, you froze. And why? Because here's a man with the kind of nerve you'd love to have. Because he's great, meeting us here alone. Because you know he's a wonder with a gun and you love life. Because you and I and every damned man here had to take his front, each to himself. If we all drew we'd kill him. sure. But who's going to lead? Who was going to be first? Who was going to make him draw? Not you, Poggin. You leave that for a lesser man, me, who've lived to see you a coward. It comes once to every gunman. You've met your match in Buck Twain. And, by God, I'm glad. Here's once I show you up. The hoarse, taunting voice failed. Nell stepped back from the comrade he hated. He was wet, shaking, haggard, but magnificent. Buck Twain, do you remember Hardin? He asked, in scarcely audible voice. Yes, replied Twain, and a flash of insight made clear Nell's attitude. You met him, forced him to draw, killed him. Yes. Hardin was the best pard I ever had. His teeth clicked together tight, and his lips set in a thin line. The room grew still. Even breathing ceased. The time for words had passed. In that long moment of suspense Nell's body gradually stiffened, and at last the quivering ceased. He crouched. His eyes had a soul-piercing fire. Twain watched them. He waited. He caught the thought, the breaking of Nell's muscle-bound rigidity. Then he drew. Through the smoke of his gun he saw two red spurts of flame. Nell's bullets thudded into the ceiling. He fell with a scream like a wild thing in agony. Twain did not see Nell die. He watched Poggin. And Poggin, like a stricken and astounded man, looked down upon his prostrate comrade. Fletcher ran at Twain with hands aloft. Hit the trail, you liar, or you'll have to kill me, he yelled. With hands still up, he shouldered and bodied Twain out of the room. Twain leaped on his horse, spurred, and plunged away. Chapter 23 Twain returned to Fairdale and camped in the mesquite till the 23rd of the month. The few days seemed endless. All he could think of was that the hour in which he must disgrace Ray Longstreth was slowly but inexorably coming. In that waiting time he learned what love was and also duty. When the day at last dawned he rode like one possessed down the rough slope, hurdling the stones and crashing through the brush, with a sound in his ears that was not all the rush of the wind. Something dragged at him. Apparently one side of his mind was unalterably fixed, while the other was a hurrying conglomeration of flashes of thought, reception of sensations. He could not get calmness. By and by, almost involuntarily, he hurried faster on. Action seemed to make his state less oppressive, it eased the weight. But the farther he went on the harder it was to continue. Had he turned his back upon love, happiness, perhaps on life itself? There seemed no use to go on farther until he was absolutely sure of himself. Twain received a clear warning thought that such work as seemed haunting and driving him could never be carried out in the mood under which he labored. He hung on to that thought. Several times he slowed up, then stopped, only to go on again. At length, as he mounted a low ridge, Fairdale lay bright and green before him not far away, and the sight was a conclusive check. There were mesquites on the ridge, and Dwayne sought the shade beneath them. It was the noon hour, with hot, glary sun and no wind. Here Dwayne had to have out his fight. Dwayne was utterly unlike himself. He could not bring the old self back. He was not the same man he once had been. But he could understand why. It was because of Ray Longstreth. Temptation assailed him. To have her his wife. It was impossible. The thought was insidiously alluring. Dwayne pictured a home. He saw himself riding through the cotton and rice and cane, home to a stately old mansion, where long-eared hounds bade him welcome, and a woman looked for him and met him with happy and beautiful smile. There would be children. And something new, strange, confounding with its emotion, came to life deep in Dwayne's heart. There would be children. Ray their mother. The kind of life a lonely outcast always yearned for and never had. He saw it all, felt it all. But beyond and above all other claims came Captain McNally's. It was then there was something cold and deathlike in Dwayne's soul. For he knew, whatever happened, of one thing he was sure, he would have to kill either Longstreth or Lawson. Longstreth might be trapped into arrest, but Lawson had no sense, no control, no fear. He would snarl like a panther and go for his gun, and he would have to be killed. This, of all consummations, was the one to be calculated upon. Dwayne came out of it all bitter and callous and sore, in the most fitting of moods to undertake a difficult and deadly enterprise. He had fallen upon his old strange, futile dreams, now rendered poignant by reason of love. He drove away those dreams. In their places came the images of the olive-skinned Longstreth with his sharp eyes, and the dark, evil-faced Lawson, and then returned tenfold more thrilling and sinister the old strange passion to meet Poggin. It was about 1 o'clock when Dwayne rode into Fairdale. The streets for the most part were deserted. He went directly to find Morton and Zimmer. He found them at length, restless, sombre, anxious, but unaware of the part he had played at ORD. They said Longstreth was home, too. It was possible that Longstreth had arrived home in ignorance. Dwayne told them to be on hand in town with their men in case he might need them, and then with teeth locked he set off for Longstreth's ranch. Dwayne stole through the bushes and trees, and when nearing the porch he heard loud, angry, familiar voices. Longstreth and Lawson were quarreling again. How Dwayne's lucky star guided him. He had no plan of action, but his brain was equal to 100 lightning-swift evolutions. He meant to take any risk rather than kill Longstreth. Both of the men were out on the porch. Dwayne wormed his way to the edge of the shrubbery and crouched low to watch for his opportunity. Longstreth looked haggard and thin. He was in his shirt sleeves, and he had come out with a gun in his hand. This he laid on a table near the wall. He wore no belt. Lawson was red, bloated, thick-lipped, all fiery and sweaty from drink, though sober on the moment, and he had the expression of a desperate man in his last stand. It was his last stand, though he was ignorant of that. "What's your news?" "You needn't be afraid of my feelings," said Lawson. "Ray confessed to an interest in this ranger," replied Longstreth. Dwayne thought Lawson would choke. He was thick-necked anyway, and the rush of blood made him tear at the soft collar of his shirt. Dwayne awaited his chance, patient, cold, all his feelings shut in a vice. "But why should your daughter meet this ranger?" demanded Lawson, harshly. "She's in love with him, and he's in love with her." Dwayne reveled in Lawson's condition. The statement might have had the force of a juggernaut. Was Longstreth sincere? What was his game? Lawson, finding his voice, cursed Ray, cursed the ranger, then Longstreth. "You damned selfish fool," cried Longstreth, in deep bitter scorn. "All you think of is yourself, your loss of the girl. Think once of me, my home, my life." Then the connection subtly put out by Longstreth apparently dawned upon the other. Somehow through this girl her father and cousin were to be betrayed. Dwayne got that impression, though he could not tell how true it was. Certainly Lawson's jealousy was his paramount emotion. "To hell with you," burst out Lawson, incoherently. He was frenzied. "I'll have her, or nobody else will." "You never will," returned Longstreth, stridently. "So help me God, I'd rather see her the ranger's wife than yours." While Lawson absorbed that shock, Longstreth leaned toward him, all of hate and menace in his mien. "Lawson, you made me what I am," continued Longstreth. "I backed you, shielded you. You're Schaldine, if the truth is told. Now it's ended. I quit you. I'm done." Their grey passion-corked faces were still as stones. "Gentlemen," Dwayne called in far-reaching voice as he stepped out. "You're both done." They wheeled to confront Dwayne. "Don't move. Not a muscle. Not a finger," he warned. Longstreth read what Lawson had not the mind to read. His face turned from grey to ashen. "What do ye mean?" yelled Lawson, fiercely, shrilly. It was not in him to obey a command, to see impending death. All quivering and strung, yet with perfect control, Dwayne raised his left hand to turn back a lapel of his open vest. The silver star flashed brightly. Lawson howled like a dog. With barbarous and insane fury, with sheer impotent folly, he swept a clawing hand for his gun. Dwayne's shot broke his action. Before Lawson ever tottered, before he loosed the gun, Longstreth leaped behind him, clasped him with left arm, quick as lightning jerked the gun from both clutching fingers and sheath. Longstreth protected himself with the body of the dead man. Dwayne saw red flashes, puffs of smoke, he heard quick reports. Something stung his left arm. Then a blow like wind, light of sound yet shocking in impact, struck him, staggered him. The hot rend of lead followed the blow. Dwayne's heart seemed to explode, yet his mind kept extraordinarily clear and rapid. Dwayne heard Longstreth work the action of Lawson's gun. He heard the hammer click, fall upon empty shells. Longstreth had used up all the loads in Lawson's gun. He cursed as a man cursed at defeat. Dwayne waited, cool and sure now. Longstreth tried to lift the dead man, to edge him closer toward the table where his own gun lay. But, considering the peril of exposing himself, he found the task beyond him. He bent, peering at Dwayne under Lawson's arm, which flopped out from his side. Longstreth's eyes were the eyes of a man who meant to kill. There was never any mistaking the strange and terrible light of eyes like those. More than once Dwayne had a chance to aim at them, at the top of Longstreth's head, at a strip of his side. Longstreth flung Lawson's body off. But even as it dropped, before Longstreth could leap, as he surely intended, for the gun, Dwayne covered him, called piercingly to him, "Don't jump for the gun. Don't. I'll kill you. Sure as God I'll kill you." Longstreth stood perhaps 10 feet from the table where his gun lay. Dwayne saw him calculating chances. He was game. He had the courage that forced Dwayne to respect him. Dwayne just saw him measure the distance to that gun. He was magnificent. He meant to do it. Dwayne would have to kill him. "Longstreth, listen," cried Dwayne, swiftly. "The game's up. You're done. But think of your daughter. I'll spare your life. I'll try to get you freedom on one condition. For her sake. I've got you nailed, all the proofs. There lies Lawson. You're alone. I've Morton and men to my aid. Give up. Surrender. Consent to demands, and I'll spare you. Maybe I can persuade McNally to let you go free back to your old country. It's for Ray's sake. Her life, perhaps her happiness, can be saved. Hurry, man. Your answer." "Suppose I refuse?" he queried, with a dark and terrible earnestness. "Then I'll kill you in your tracks. You can't move a hand. Your word or death. Hurry, Longstreth. Be a man. For her sake. Quick. Another second now, I'll kill you." "All right, Buck Dwayne, I give my word," he said, and deliberately walked to the chair and fell into it. Longstreth looked strangely at the bloody blot on Dwayne's shoulder. "There come the girls," he suddenly exclaimed. "Can you help me drag Lawson inside? They mustn't see him." Dwayne was facing down the porch toward the court and corrals. Miss Longstreth and Ruth had come in sight, were swiftly approaching, evidently alarmed. The two men succeeded in drawing Lawson into the house before the girls saw him. "Dwayne, you're not hard hit," said Longstreth. "Reckon not," replied Dwayne. "I'm sorry. If only you could have told me sooner. Lawson, damn him. Always I've split over him. But the last time, Longstreth. Yes, and I came near driving you to kill me, too. Dwayne, you talked me out of it. for Ray's sake. She'll be in here in a minute. This'll be harder than facing a gun. Hard now. But I hope it'll turn out all right. Dwayne, will you do me a favor? He asked, and he seemed shamefaced. Sure. Let Ray and Ruth think Lawson shot you. He's dead. It can't matter. Dwayne, the old side of my life is coming back. It's been coming. It'll be here just about when she enters this room. And, by God, I'd change places with Lawson if I could. Glad you said that, Longstreth replied Dwayne. And sure, Lawson plugged me. It's our secret. Just then Ray and Ruth entered the room. Dwayne heard two low cries, so different in tone, and he saw two white faces. Ray came to his side. She lifted a shaking hand to point at the blood upon his breast. White and mute, she gazed from that to her father. Papa, cried Ray, wringing her hands. Don't give way, he replied, huskily. Both you girls will need your nerve. Dwayne isn't badly hurt. But Floyd is dead. Listen. Let me tell it quick. There's been a fight. It was Lawson. It was Lawson's gun that shot Dwayne. Dwayne let me off. In fact, Ray, he saved me. I'm to divide my property, return so far as possible what I've stolen, leave Texas at once with Dwayne, under arrest. He says maybe he can get McNally, the ranger captain, to let me go. For your sake. She stood there, realizing her deliverance, with the dark and tragic glory of her eyes passing from her father to Dwayne. You must rise above this, said Dwayne to her. I expected this to ruin you. But your father is alive. He will live it down. I'm sure I can promise you he'll be free. Perhaps back there in Louisiana the dishonor will never be known. This country is far from your old home. And even in San Antonio and Austin a man's evil repute means little. Then the line between a rustler and a rancher is hard to draw in these wild border days. Rustling is stealing cattle, and I once heard a well-known rancher say that all rich cattlemen had done a little stealing. Your father drifted out here, and, like a good many others, he succeeded. It's perhaps just as well not to split hairs, to judge him by the law and morality of a civilized country. Some way or other he drifted in with bad men. Maybe a deal that was honest somehow tied his hands. This matter of land, water, a few stray head of stock had to be decided out of court. I'm sure in his case he never realized where he was drifting. Then one thing led to another, until he was face to face with dealing that took on crooked form. To protect himself he bound men to him. And so the gang developed. Many powerful gangs have developed that way out here. He could not control them. He became involved with them. And eventually their dealings became deliberately and boldly dishonest. That meant the inevitable spilling of blood sooner or later. And so he grew into the leader because he was the strongest. Whatever he is to be judged for, I think he could have been infinitely worse. Chapter XV. On the morning of the 26th, Dwayne rode into Bradford in time to catch the early train. His wounds did not seriously incapacitate him. Longstreth was with him. And Miss Longstreth and Ruth Herbert would not be left behind. They were all leaving Fairdale forever. Longstreth had turned over the whole of his property to Morton, who was to divide it as he and his comrades believed just. Dwayne had left Fairdale with his party by night, passed through Sanssouci in the early hours of dawn, and reached Bradford as he had planned. That fateful morning found Dwayne outwardly calm, but inwardly he was in a tumult. He wanted to rush to Val Verde. Would Captain McNally be there with his rangers, as Dwayne had planned for them to be? Memory of that tawny Poggin returned with strange passion. Dwayne had borne hours and weeks and months of waiting, had endured the long hours of the outlaw, but now he had no patience. The whistle of the train made him leap. It was a fast train, yet the ride seemed slow. Dwayne, disliking to face Longstreth and the passengers in the car, changed his seat to one behind his prisoner. They had seldom spoken. Longstreth sat with bowed head, deep in thought. The girls sat in a seat nearby and were pale but composed. Occasionally the train halted briefly at a station. The latter half of that ride Dwayne had observed a wagon road running parallel with the railroad, sometimes right alongside, at others near or far away. When the train was about 20 miles from Val Verde, Dwayne espied a dark group of horsemen trotting eastward. His blood beat like a hammer at his temples. The gang. He thought he recognized the tawny Poggin and felt a strange inward contraction. He thought he recognized the clean-cut Blossom Kane, the black-bearded Giant Bolt, the red-faced Panhandle Smith, and Fletcher. There was another man strange to him. Was that Nell? No. It could not have been Nell. Dwayne leaned over the seat and touched Longstreth on the shoulder. "Look," he whispered. Schaldine was stiff. He had already seen. The train flashed by, the outlaw gang receded out of range of sight. "Did you notice Nell wasn't with them?" whispered Dwayne. Dwayne did not speak to Longstreth again till the train stopped at Val Verde. They got off the car, and the girls followed as naturally as ordinary travelers. The station was a good deal larger than that at Bradford, and there was considerable action and bustle incident to the arrival of the train. Dwayne's sweeping gaze searched faces, rested upon a man who seemed familiar. This fellow's look, too, was that of one who knew Dwayne, but was waiting for a sign, a cue. Then Dwayne recognized him, McNally, clean-shaven. Without mustache he appeared different, younger. When McNally saw that Dwayne intended to greet him, to meet him, he hurried forward. A keen light flashed from his eyes. He was glad, eager, yet suppressing himself, and the glances he sent back and forth from Dwayne to Longstreth were questioning, doubtful. Certainly Longstreth did not look the part of an outlaw. "Dwayne." "Lord," "I'm glad to see you," was the captain's greeting. Then at closer look into Dwayne's face his warmth fled. Something he saw there checked his enthusiasm, or at least its utterance. "McNally, shake hand with Zane," said Dwayne, low-voiced. The ranger captain stood dumb, motionless. But he saw Longstreth's instant action, and awkwardly he reached for the outstretched hand. "Any of your men down here?" queried Dwayne, sharply. "No. They're uptown." "Come. McNally, you walk with him. We've ladies in the party." "I'll come behind with them." They set off uptown. Longstreth walked as if he were with friends on the way to dinner. The girls were mute. McNally walked like a man in a trance. There was not a word spoken in 4 blocks. Presently Dwayne espied a stone building on a corner of the broad street. There was a big sign, "Rancher's Bank." "There's the hotel," said McNally. "Some of my men are there. We've scattered around." They crossed the street, went through office and lobby, and then Dwayne asked McNally to take them to a private room. Without a word the captain complied. When they were all inside, Dwayne closed the door, and, drawing a deep breath as if of relief, he faced them calmly. "Miss Longstreth, you and Miss Ruth try to make yourselves comfortable now," he said. "And don't be distressed." Then he turned to his captain. "McNally, this girl is the daughter of the man I've brought to you, and this one is his niece." Then Dwayne briefly related Longstreth's story, and, though he did not spare the rustler chief, he was generous. "When I went after Longstreth," concluded Dwayne, "it was either to kill him or offer him freedom on conditions. So I chose the latter for his daughter's sake. He has already disposed of all his property. I believe he'll live up to the conditions. He's to leave Texas, never to return." The name Zane has been a mystery, and now it'll fade. A few moments later Dwayne followed McNally to a large room, like a hall, and here were men reading and smoking. Dwayne knew them, Rangers. McNally beckoned to his men. "Boys, here he is." "How many men have you?" asked Dwayne. 15. McNally almost embraced Dwayne, would probably have done so but for the dark grimness that seemed to be coming over the man. Instead he glowed, he sputtered, he tried to talk, to wave his hands. He was beside himself. And his rangers crowded closer, eager, like hounds ready to run. They all talked at once, and the word most significant and frequent in their speech was outlaws. McNally clapped his fist in his hand. "This'll make the adjutant sick with joy. Maybe we won't have it on the governor. We'll show them about the ranger service. Dwayne, how'd you ever do it? Now, Captain, not the half nor the quarter of this job's done. The gang's coming down the road. I saw them from the train. They'll ride into town on the dot, 2:30. "How many?" asked McNally. "Poggin, Blossom Kane, Panhandle Smith, Bolt, Jim Fletcher, and another man I don't know. These are the picked men of Shzaldine's gang. I'll bet they'll be the fastest, hardest bunch you rangers ever faced. Poggin, that's the hard nut to crack. I've heard their records since I've been in Val Verde. Where's Nell? They say he's a boy, but hell and blazes. Nell's dead. Ah, exclaimed McNally, softly. Then he grew businesslike, cool, and of harder aspect. Dwayne, it's your game today. I'm only a ranger under orders. We're all under your orders. We've absolute faith in you. Make your plan quick, so I can go around and post the boys who're not here. You understand there's no sense in trying to arrest Poggin, Kane, and that lot, queried Dwayne. No, I don't understand that, replied McNally, bluntly. It can't be done. The drop can't be got on such men. If you meet them they shoot, and mighty quick and straight. Poggin. That outlaw has no equal with a gun, unless he's got to be killed quick. They'll all have to be killed. They're all bad, desperate, no fear, are lightning in action. Very well, Dwayne, then it's a fight. That'll be easier, perhaps. The boys are spoiling for a fight. Out with your plan, now. Put one man at each end of this street, just at the edge of town. Let him hide there with a rifle to block the escape of any outlaw that we might fail to get. I had a good look at the bank building. It's well situated for our purpose. Put 4 men up in that room over the bank, 4 men, 2 at each open window. Let them hide till the game begins. They want to be there so in case these foxy outlaws get wise before they are down on the ground or inside the bank. The rest of your men put inside behind the counters, where they'll hide. Now go over to the bank, spring the thing on the bank officials, and don't let them shut up the bank. You want their aid. Let them make sure of their gold. But the clerks and cashier ought to be at their desks or window when Poggin rides up. He'll glance in before he gets down. They make no mistakes, these fellows. We must be slicker than they are, or lose. When you get the bank people wise, send your men over one by one. No hurry, no excitement, no unusual thing to attract notice in the bank. All right. That's great. Tell me, where do you intend to wait? Dwayne heard McNally's question, and it struck him peculiarly. He had seemed to be planning and speaking mechanically. As he was confronted by the fact it nonplussed him somewhat, and he became thoughtful, with lowered head. Well, you wait, Dwayne, insisted McNally, with keen eyes speculating. I'll wait in front, just inside the door, replied Dwayne, with an effort. Why? Demanded the captain. Well, began Dwayne, slowly, Poggin will get down first and start in. But the others won't be far behind. They'll not get swift till inside. The thing is, they mustn't get clear inside, because the instant they do they'll pull guns. That means death to somebody. If we can, we want to stop them just at the door. But will you hide? Asked McNally. Hide? The idea had not occurred to Dwayne. There's a wide open doorway, a sort of round hall, a vestibule, with steps leading up to the bank. There's a door in the vestibule, too. It leads somewhere. We can put men in there. You can be there. Dwayne was silent. See here, Dwayne, began McNally, nervously. You shan't take any undue risk here. You'll hide with the rest of us. No. The word was wrenched from Dwayne. McNally stared, and then a strange, comprehending light seemed to flit over his face. Dwayne, I can give you no orders today, he said, distinctly. I'm only offering advice. Need you take any more risks? You've done a grand job for the service, already. You've paid me 1,000 times for that pardon. You've redeemed yourself. The governor, the adjutant general, the whole state will rise up and honor you. The game's almost up. We'll kill these outlaws, or enough of them to break forever their power. I say, as a ranger, need you take more risk than your captain? Still Dwayne remained silent. He was locked between two forces. And one, a tide that was bursting at its bounds, seemed about to overwhelm him. Finally that side of him, the retreating self, the weaker, found a voice. Captain, you want this job to be sure? He asked. Certainly. I've told you the way. I alone know the kind of men to be met. Just what I'll do or where I'll be I can't say yet. In meetings like this the moment decides. But I'll be there. McNally spread wide his hands, looked helplessly at his curious and sympathetic rangers, and shook his head. Now you've done your work, laid the trap, is this strange move of yours going to be fair to Miss Longstreth? Asked McNally, in significant low voice. Like a great tree chopped at the roots, Dwayne vibrated to that. He looked up as if he had seen a ghost. Mercilessly the ranger captain went on, you can win her, Dwayne. Oh, you can't fool me. I was wise in a minute. Fight with us from cover, then go back to her. You will have served the Texas Rangers as no other man has. I'll accept your resignation. You'll be free, honored, happy. That girl loves you. I saw it in her eyes. But Dwayne cut him short with a fierce gesture. He lunged up to his feet, and the Rangers fell back. Dark, silent, grim as he had been, still there was a transformation singularly more sinister, stranger. Enough. I'm done, he said, somberly. I've planned. Do we agree, or shall I meet Poggin and his gang alone? McNally cursed and again threw up his hands, this time in baffled chagrin. There was deep regret in his dark eyes as they rested upon Dwayne. Dwayne was left alone. Never had his mind been so quick, so clear, so wonderful in its understanding of what had heretofore been intricate and elusive impulses of his strange nature. His determination was to meet Poggin, meet him before anyone else had a chance, Poggin first, and then the others. He was as unalterable in that decision as if on the instant of its acceptance he had become stone. Why? Then came realization. He was not a ranger now. He cared nothing for the state. He had no thought of freeing the community of a dangerous outlaw, of ridding the country of an obstacle to its progress and prosperity. He wanted to kill Poggin. It was significant now that he forgot the other outlaws. He was the gunman, the gun thrower, the gunfighter, passionate and terrible. His father's blood, that dark and fierce strain, his mother's spirit, that strong and unquenchable spirit of the surviving pioneer, these had been in him, and the killings, one after another, the wild and haunted years, had made him, absolutely in spite of his will, the gunman. He realized it now, bitterly, hopelessly. The thing he had intelligence enough to hate he had become. At last he shuddered under the driving, ruthless inhuman bloodlust of the gunman. Long ago he had seemed to seal in a tomb that horror of his kind, the need, in order to forget the haunting, sleepless presence of his last victim, to go out and kill another. But it was still there in his mind, and now it stalked out, worse, more powerful, magnified by its rest, augmented by the violent passions peculiar and inevitable to that strange, wild product of the Texas frontier, the gunfighter. And those passions were so violent, so raw, so base, so much lower than what ought to have existed in a thinking man. Actual pride of his record. Actual vanity in his speed with a gun. Actual jealousy of any rival. Dwayne could not believe it. But there he was, without a choice. What he had feared for years had become a monstrous reality. Respect for himself, blindness, a certain honor that he had clung to while in outlawry, all, like scales, seemed to fall away from him. He stood stripped bare, his soul naked, the soul of Cain. Always since the first brand had been forced and burned upon him he had been ruined. But now with conscience flayed to the quick, yet utterly powerless over this tiger instinct, he was lost. He said it. He admitted it. And at the utter abasement the soul he despised suddenly leaped and quivered with the thought of Ray Longstreth. Then came agony. As he could not govern all the chances of this fatal meeting, as all his swift and deadly genius must be occupied with Poggin, perhaps in vain, as hard-shooting men whom he could not watch would be close behind. This almost certainly must be the end of Buck Dwayne. That did not matter. But he loved the girl. He wanted her. All her sweetness, her fire, and pleading returned to torture him. At that moment the door opened, and Ray Longstreth entered. "Dwayne," she said, softly. "Captain McNally sent me to you." "But you shouldn't have come," replied Dwayne. "As soon as he told me I would have come whether he wished it or not. You left me, all of us, stunned. I had no time to thank you." "Oh, I do with all my soul. It was noble of you." Father is overcome. He didn't expect so much. and he'll be true. But, Dwayne, I was told to hurry, and here I'm selfishly using time. Go, then, and leave me. You mustn't unnerve me now, when there's a desperate game to finish. Need it be desperate? She whispered, coming close to him. Yes, it can't be else. McNally had sent her to weaken him, of that Dwayne was sure. And he felt that she had wanted to come. Her eyes were dark, strained, beautiful, and they shed a light upon Dwayne he had never seen before. You're going to take some mad risk, she said. Let me persuade you not to. You said you cared for me, and oh, Dwayne, don't you know? The low voice, deep, sweet as an old chord, faltered and broke and failed. Dwayne sustained a sudden shock and an instant of paralyzed confusion of thought. She moved, she swept out her hands, and the wonder of her eyes dimmed in a flood of tears. My God! You can't care for me, he cried, hoarsely. Then she met him, hands outstretched. But I do. Swift as light, Dwayne caught her and held her to his breast. He stood holding her tight, with the feel of her warm, throbbing breast and the clasp of her arms as flesh and blood realities to fight a terrible fear. He felt her, and for the moment the might of it was stronger than all the demons that possessed him. And he held her as if she had been his soul, his strength on earth, his hope of heaven, against his lips. The strife of doubt all past. He found his sight again. And there rushed over him a tide of emotion unutterably sweet and full, strong like an intoxicating wine, deep as his nature, something glorious and terrible as the blaze of the sun to one long in darkness. He had become an outcast, a wanderer, a gunman, a victim of circumstances. He had lost and suffered worse than death in that loss. He had gone down the endless bloody trail, a killer of men, a fugitive whose mind slowly and inevitably closed to all except the instinct to survive and a black despair. And now, with this woman in his arms, her swelling breast against his, in this moment almost of resurrection, he bent under the storm of passion and joy possible only to him who had endured so much. Do you care, a little? He whispered, unsteadily. He bent over her, looking deep into the dark wet eyes. She uttered a low laugh that was half sob, and her arms slipped up to his neck. A little, oh, Dwayne, a great deal. Their lips met in their first kiss. The sweetness, the fire of her mouth seemed so new, so strange, so irresistible to Dwayne. His sore and hungry heart throbbed with thick and heavy beats. He felt the outcast's need of love. And he gave up to the enthralling moment. She met him halfway, returned kiss for kiss, clasp for clasp, her face scarlet, her eyes closed, till, her passion and strength spent, she fell back upon his shoulder. Dwayne suddenly thought she was going to faint. He divined then that she had understood him, would have denied him nothing, not even her life, in that moment. But she was overcome, and he suffered a pang of regret at his unrestraint. Presently she recovered, and she drew only the closer, and leaned upon him with her face upturned. He felt her hands on his, and they were soft, clinging, strong, like steel under velvet. He felt the rise and fall, the warmth of her breast. A tremor ran over him. He tried to draw back, and if he succeeded a little her form swayed with him, pressing closer. She held her face up, and he was compelled to look. It was wonderful now, white, yet glowing, with the red lips parted, and dark eyes alluring. But that was not all. There was passion, unquenchable spirit, woman's resolve deep and mighty. "I love you, Dwayne," she said. "For my sake, don't go out to meet this outlaw face to face. It's something wild in you. Conquer it if you love me." Dwayne became suddenly weak, and when he did take her into his arms again he scarcely had strength to lift her to a seat beside him. She seemed more than a dead weight. Her calmness had fled. She was throbbing, palpitating, quivering, with hot wet cheeks and arms that clung to him like vines. She lifted her mouth to his, whispering, "Kiss me." She meant to change him, hold him. Dwayne bent down, and her arms went round his neck and drew him close. With his lips on hers he seemed to float away. That kiss closed his eyes, and he could not lift his head. He sat motionless holding her, blind and helpless, wrapped in a sweet dark glory. She kissed him, one long endless kiss, or else 1,000 times. Her lips, her wet cheeks, her hair, the softness, the fragrance of her, the tender clasp of her arms, the swell of her breast, all these seemed to enclose him. Dwayne could not put her from him. He yielded to her lips and arms, watching her, involuntarily returning her caresses, sure now of her intent, fascinated by the sweetness of her, bewildered, almost lost.